Good morning. We are continuing with our chapter 2 with Strengthen Your Plan B. Sometimes we feel at a loss because we can't think of an attractive plan B. Take this not as a reason for discouragement, but as an impetus to improve your plan B. As the following example illustrates. A large U.S. company had recently launched a new product in the marketplace. They had hoped for great success, but the sales were disappointing and competition was stiffer than expected. Knowing that many customers found the price high, the company was trying to cut costs wherever possible. It turned out that the biggest part of the cost was a key ingredient manufactured for them by a company in Europe. The company asked the supplier to cut its price and offered to send in a team of cost-cutting consultants. But the supplier bristled at the request. "We have been in business for over 200 years. You've hardly been a country for 200 years. We don't tell you how to run your business, so don't tell us how to run ours." The company executives were frustrated, but felt they had little leverage, for they had signed a 10-year contract with the supplier on a cost-plus basis, guaranteeing to the supplier reimbursement of all of their costs plus a profit. What we got going on there? The company contacted my colleague Joe Haubenhofer because they wanted help with this difficult negotiation. When Joe met with the company officials to prepare them for the negotiation, they were feeling demoralized and hopeless. How could they stand up for their interests in this situation and in effect say no to the supplier's recalcitrant behavior? They felt their hands were tied because they were absolutely dependent on this one supplier. There was nothing they could do, or so they believed, until Joe asked them, "What's your plan B? What are you going to do if the supplier refuses to cooperate for the rest of the contract?" A plan B? The managers chorused. "That's the problem. We don't have a plan B. We locked into this 10-year contract, and there is no way out." Hold on a minute," Joe replied. "What do you mean to say? What you mean to say is that your current alternatives, breaking the contract or taking the product off of the market, are extremely unattractive. Would you be willing to spend a little time taking a hard look at whether there is any way to improve your plan B?" The managers agreed, skeptically, of course. An hour later, in the midst of an intense brainstorming session, one of them asked, "Is there no other factory in the world that has the technology to make this product?" To which another replied, "Well, as a matter of fact, I seem to remember this plant in the Midwest that may have the necessary technology. But if my memory serves me right, it was closed by its owner." Someone was dispatched to check out the facts. Later that day, he reported back that the manager had been correct. The plant did have the appropriate technology, and it was closed, but it might be available for sale. Within a day, the team had drawn up a business plan for purchasing the plant, putting it back into operation, and producing the necessary ingredient in quantity at the right cost. The plan was presented to the senior management and speedily approved as a contingency plan, a Plan B. Then the team went to work preparing for their upcoming visit to the supplier. It was as if they were a completely different team, my colleague reported. With a satisfactory Plan B in hand, they were no longer demoralized, but on the contrary, confident. They confessed to us they carefully assessed the supplier's interests and perceptions and sought to invent mutually advantageous options for cutting costs and preserving their partnership. As it turned out, they never had to use their Plan B or even to reveal it. Their careful preparation gave them the confidence they needed to negotiate effectively with the supplier and reach agreement on a strategy for cutting operational costs. And the key factor in this unexpected success, the company negotiators told me later, was that confidence. It enabled them to transform their negatively charged emotions of fear and resignation into resolve and determination. Brainstorm a variety of plans. In developing your Plan B, it is valuable to consider a variety of possible alternatives. The managers in this example begin by participating in a brainstorming session and thus came up with a creative alternative that no one had considered before. The biggest obstacle to coming up with creative alternatives is a little voice in the back of our head that keeps saying, "That won't work," or "That's ridiculous." These are phrases that kill off potentially creative ideas. That critical voice comes from the part of the brain that evaluates and judges. While useful and even necessary, it gets in the way of the creative part of the brain that generates new ideas. Excuse me. The whole secret of brainstorming is to separate the two cognitive functions. Invent first, evaluate later. The golden rule of brainstorming is to suspend all criticism for a certain period of time, whether a few minutes or a few hours. Generate as many ideas as you can. Welcome wild ideas. Many of the best plans start off as wild ideas. Then you can start to evaluate, sifting through the ideas and placing an asterisk by the most promising one. Brainstorming is often best done with others, friends, colleagues, and associates. Each person's contribution usually stimulates ideas in the others, like a firecracker setting off other firecrackers around it. Develop one or several possible alternatives into concrete operational plans. This process takes what might otherwise remain a wild idea and turns it into a serious plan that can command respect and support. Exactly what the managers did when they researched what sounded like an impossibility, finding another source, and wrote a business plan that could be presented to the company's leaders. In coming up with alternatives, here are a few different types to consider. I just want to pause for a second because there's some kind of like storm flying in from the right side of the screen. And it doesn't look like we're going to get that sunrise, but I think it's kind of neat to catch this massive gray storm as it arrives and covers the city of Tulsa. All right, back to the reading that we're doing. Just had to point out that was awesome. It is so windy, so I've got the windows up. Otherwise, you may not be able to hear me. But that is beautiful to watch. Just coming in from... I just want to say that wasn't on the schedule for today. I knew there was weather coming in. I didn't know that I would get... Okay, back to the reading. Here we go. This is our Empower Your No from chapter 2, and we're still reading the book, The Power of a Positive No by William Ury. All right. Do it yourself. One alternative is unilateral in nature. What can you do on your own to satisfy your interests and needs? What if you no longer depend on the other? How could you best manage independent of the other's cooperation? The managers in the case, discussed above, for example, developed the possibility of manufacturing the needed ingredient independent of the supplier. The next one is exit. Another unilateral self-help strategy is exit. What would it mean for you to leave the situation or relationship with the other? Coping with a difficult boss, an employee investigates other job possibilities within the same organization and outside. Faced with saying no to a difficult customer, a salesperson cultivates other customers. A woman being abused by her partner prepares to leave home with her children and take refuge in a family member's home. A lawyer I know was asked to work on a project she found morally repugnant and offensive. She was able to say no effectively because she had made the decision beforehand to quit my job if my no was not accepted. The next one is third side. There are also trilateral alternatives. Are there potential third parties to whom you could turn for help if you cannot reach initial agreement with the other? If a neighbor continues to play loud music, you could ask the building supervisor to intervene or bring the matter up at a building residence meeting. If you are unable to persuade your coworker to stop asking the secretary to put your work aside in favor of his, you may need to go to the boss. Or your plan B might be to use the court system, as Rosa Parks did in taking her case all the way to the Supreme Court. And the next one. Intermediate and ultimate plans. If you cannot reach agreement with the other, your first resort may not be your full plan B, but a smaller intermediate step. You can develop a sequence of plans starting from the smallest and leading up to the ultimate big plan. One restaurant chain faced with saying no to a restaurant franchisee who was consistently failing to meet the quality standards associated with the brand, prepared an intermediate plan of putting the franchisee on probation. The chain's ultimate plan B, if the franchisee did not bring their establishment up to standard, was to remove the brand from the franchisee. All right. The next section is build a winning coalition. If the other is more powerful than you, one plan B you could consider is to build a winning coalition. In my seminars, I like to use a teaching story about a wise Zen master who in the course of giving a class to a group of students deliberately puts one of them in a quandary. As the student is lifting a cup of tea to his lips, the master says, "If you drink that cup of tea, I will beat you with this stick. And if you don't drink that cup of tea, I will beat you with this stick." What would you do if you were that student? I ask the seminar participants. The most common response I receive is, "I would drink the tea. I might as well enjoy it." Another common response is, "I would throw the tea in the master's face." Those are the two classic responses to superior power: submission, because you have no choice, and attack. Neither, however, usually proves satisfying. Then people start to get imaginative with their answers. I would offer him the tea. I would ask why. I would take forever so he couldn't tell whether I was drinking it or not drinking it, and so on. As many possibilities as they generate, however, they almost always overlook another alternative, that of building a coalition. I think it is because when we imagine the scene, we see in our mind's eye the master and the student. We all too often forget that there are others in the room too. "Help me, friends!" you can cry to your fellow students. Although the master with the stick may be more powerful than the student, he is not more powerful than all the students put together. A coalition can level the playing field. A good question to ask ourselves is, who shares my interests or might be persuaded to work with me to make sure my needs are respected? If you are faced with an abusive boss, it helps to gather support from other employees so that collectively you can confront the boss about his behavior. If an aging parent is refusing to give up driving a car while they are clearly in danger to themselves and others, it helps to enlist your siblings' support. Rosa Parks and her colleagues used the power of a broad-based coalition of blacks and sympathetic whites to support her no to segregated busing. There are two kinds of power in this world. Community organizer Saul Alinsky liked to say, organized money and organized people. Ask yourself, who could be possible if unlikely allies in my situation? If you are in sales, for example, it may be the end user for your products who could say a supportive word on your behalf to the purchasing representatives who are pressing you so hard. If you are in politics, an unlikely ally may be a political opponent who nevertheless shares a common interest with you in promoting a particular piece of legislation. One telling example of building a coalition as a plan B is the story of a pilot in one of the first passenger planes to leave Denver shortly after the horrifying attacks of 9/11. Before the flight took off, the pilot announced to the fearful passengers, "If anybody stands up and is trying to take over the plane, stand up together, take whatever you have and throw it at their heads. You have to aim for their faces so that they have to defend themselves." The pilot also encouraged passengers to throw blankets over the heads of any hijackers, wrestling them to the ground and holding them until he landed. "We, the people, will not be defeated," he declared. Everybody on the plane was applauding, said one passenger on the flight. People had tears coming down their faces. It was as if we had a choice here, and if something were to happen, we're not completely powerless. That's the point. Remember that you are not alone. The next one. Anticipate the other's power moves. I'm going to stop here, and I'll put this last section of 20. I'm so sorry. We are on page 68. The next one will be anticipate the other's power moves, and then that will finish our chapter 2. We're rolling right through this one. Thank you for being with me this morning. I mean, we caught a little bit of sunrise, and technically the sun is behind all of these clouds rising. So I appreciate you being with me today. Thank you.